Good evening. Today is August 9th, 2021, and this is the 63rd episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. Before we begin our show today and our podcast, I want to take this time with our prayers and wishes going out to the family of Ellie French, who was a Chicago police officer, and of Wash was on the 7th of August. Unfortunately, she lost her life to violence. Her partner is right now still fighting for his life in Chicago. It is something that I decided today to bring Al Johnson, my guest, who's also senior advisor on the senior advisory board of the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. And we're going to be looking at a year in a review from everything that happened, from what we had discussed about the Wuhan Lab, possible origins of the leak of the COVID-19 that took place, and we had written about it a year ago, April, to what is happening with all the violence that's taking place in Chicago. With that said, Al, I'm going to welcome you in, and I want to start with what happened in Chicago. Kind of take your comments and your perspective on it, if you could.
Well, it's good to be back again, Sargis, and thank you very much for inviting me back. I know it's been a very busy month for you, and I appreciate you making the time.
No, it's good to have you here. I know that we've had these discussions before. I've had Sheriff Clark on the show. I've had the lead for the Illinois police departments here. I've spoken with the Fraternal Order Police lead, and all the issues that we have discussed over the years seems that they're not resolving themselves. I know you guys have had your own issues up where you are in your neck of the woods, but this is a national issue, and unfortunately, until something happens to individuals high up when it comes to the crimes that are taking place, I think unfortunately it's going to be as is. You have individuals with these ideologies that really don't care what happens to the police officers, and the system seems constantly to be re-electing those individuals in their places.
You're absolutely right. In fact, you've hit upon a key feature, that the difference of the wave of violence that we've seen, starting about 2020 to now, which, sadly, was punctuated last night by the death of the officer French in Chicago. It's made national news. But the key feature that's different in, say, the violence that people remember from the 60s, the late 60s, early 70s, when there was a similar wave of violence, but that tapered off, and it was somewhat managed, even though police forces didn't have a lot of, community policing and programs that were designed to go within the community as we do now. Policing was a little more forceful, a little more straightforward back in the 60s and 70s. In fact, Officer French from Chicago was part of the newly formed community policing team that was formed up in September of last year, along with the critical incident response team. About 500 officers that was specifically designed to go into these communities and to be able to interact with the communities and to support those communities in their security. And so when that officer, basically unfortunately kind of the epitome of what the community policing is about, Officer French was the one who unfortunately was hit and passed away. And so that punctuates that, what can we do when the community safety team, which is designed specifically to help those communities and was put into emphasis last year in September, when that officer is shot in the line of duty protecting that community specifically, we have to ask ourselves, what have we learned in the last, 40, 50 years since the violence of the 70s, when so much has been put into this kind of community focus? And a couple of things that you mentioned are that you have attorney generals, you have political leaders, and you have a corporate disinformation office or outlets, which are, formerly called news, and all of them are doing things that exacerbate the violence. So back in the 70s, you had attorney generals that went after, when Manson did his rampage and his family did the rampage in California, the attorney general went after him. When people would do property, massive property damage, when they would do terrorist activities, the attorney general would go after them. Both the local attorney generals, municipal attorney generals, state and national attorney generals would do it. Today, we see the opposite. In Portland just yesterday, which is fascinating for me, is that you had a Christian group. So for 2 days in a row, you had a Christian group that went to the riverfront just to pray in Portland. That's it. They weren't making any overt political statements. They weren't challenging anybody. They just wanted to do kind of a sunrise service over the weekend. and they were attacked by, the euphemistically called Antifa. And the police on the Saturday and the Sunday did not come out to respond. They did not protect basically families that were on the riverfront doing this. So when you create this environment in your attorney generals that just do catch and release, and when you have corporate disinformation outlets like the news that are promoting this violence and aren't emphasizing the fact that you do have this community safety team, you do have police officers, good police officers working hard in their communities doing that, you create a situation which divides and separates and foments the anger. So the difference between now and then is I honestly don't know of a way out. I think this is going to get worse because all the mechanisms that should be putting water on the fire and getting everybody to a peaceful resolution are actually throwing gasoline on the fire. And unfortunately, I think we're going to have more incidents like we had yesterday in Chicago. And quite honestly, I don't know what to do. 2020, 79 officers were shot. And already this year, 38 Chicago police officers have been shot at. And again, I think it's just going to continue to get worse. It's 500% increase over 2019. And you work with the police officers there in Chicago, and they did a lot of stuff back in, setting up this community safety team. What do you think can be handled? Because from my perspective, it's kind of bleak.
Well, it's leadership, Al. Look, you and me have served in the military. We've been downrange. It's all leadership. The problem we have here is that the system is set up to keep these bad leaders in. Lawyer Lightfoot right now cannot be impeached. The City Council of Chicago cannot impeach her. The only other mechanism you have is you have to vote her out. Well, unfortunately, like you were mentioning, the systems are existing. Once you become an incumbent, it's hard. You cannot wedge those people out using anything. And I don't want to say, what we would be using in the military because, tomorrow the same social media will ban our discussion because they'll say, Colonel Sangari used this word. So I get to choose my words carefully, but you cannot pry these people off. As soon as the shooting took place and we lost the officer, right away you had newspapers coming out and not calling them police officers, not talking about what part of a program they were. They call them cops, which is on a slang side of the house for the people on the street, kind of demeaning them. So the newspapers are agitating in that way, and they're talking to individuals who did the shooting in the vehicle as basically civilians and looking at them from a perspective of why did the shooting take place. Right now you have a civilian review board that is looking at this, is not looking at it to really justify the shooting, is looking at it to see what it can find to say that the cops are in this case, as they would like to call them, or the police officers were in a place where they shouldn't have been, or maybe they should have used other type of tactics. When you have cash bail, you can have all these individuals go free. That's the issue you run into. Now, tomorrow, let's say in 2022, you finally are able to not allow these machine politics to do mail-in voting, which there's a lot of corruption involved in it, as we saw in 2020, and then try not to maybe use the whole COVID mandate to keep people home in order to be able to extend the voting block, to be able to try to see how they could maybe utilize their capabilities and processes in the machine to keep these people in. Tomorrow, let's say you vote these individuals out, there's unfortunately hundreds and thousands of this type of an individual, like we have as a mayor of Chicago, waiting in the wings to take her place. Why? Because God forbid you walk in and you vote out the people in a party that you've been voting on and for a lifetime. Literally, if you want to destroy the Democratic Party, keep on voting as you are. The only way you could do it, you get a one time in 2020, you get to basically vote them all out. I don't care how good they are, just vote them all out and finally flip the system. If you don't do it, you'll never be able to get to a point where you could fix these issues. And these crime issues, if you look at them specifically in these one-party held territories, is where you have the problems. Again, it goes back to the leadership. If you don't have good leaders, you're going to continue having these issues and these problems. Unfortunately, as I said, what is unfortunate about it is until somebody well-known suffers violence in the cities at the hands of these criminals, nobody's going to do anything about it. And the only time they care and do anything about it is when they realize maybe the violence is coming closer to them and then they're forced to have to deal with it. I think this whole divide and conquer theory in politics has worked for them. It keeps them in office. It gets money funneled to their coffers. It allows them to create these offshoot organizations to do what they can. And it allows them to basically hold the reins of power. Right now, the only thing they're thinking about is how do we win the 2022 election? They could care less about the officer that died. Every year, I go down to Springfield with my brothers in the Legion of St. Michael law enforcement community, and every year, all I hear is why this politician couldn't make it, that politician couldn't make it, and the excuses as to why they're not there. They don't even show up for the Memorial Day recognition. You think these people are going to do anything as far as changing the system? It's up to the voter, but the voter has to go in and stop voting along party lines. And in Illinois, I'm sorry, it wasn't the previous POTUS that destroyed the state. It has been the same party that has been choking the life out of it. And this year we lost one congressional district. What did they do? They took all the Republicans at the state levels and combined their districts together. And the reason why they haven't even been able to come up with a electoral map yet for the congressionals and what they have to look at in the case that I ran in the 9th congressional district, because they've screwed up the numbers so much and they're hyperinflated them to make sure that they have a batch of votes that they can always flip to keep their person in. They don't even know what the count is. That's why they're struggling to be able to draw the maps. It's not because you have incompetent people that cannot add one or two. They've screwed their own numbers so much in order to be able to win races at the local levels. They don't know what the count is when in their own districts. That's why they have no clue how the hell to draw the maps up anymore, even though they're controlled by one party rule. Corruption everywhere. And you have individuals leaving this state constantly. This state itself, Al, believe it or not, in Illinois, we have more gas that we can access for the entire nation if need be, then the entire Saudi Arabia has oil. Yet we can't be in the black. We're constantly in the red. It is absolutely amazing. You got to vote this party out, period. It's one party. I'm not going to even say who it is. You should know if you're a voter in Chicago and in Illinois. It's the same party. Stop walking in and voting them in. I don't care if they answer the call for your grandmother when she had a Social Security question. The entire country is burning. Nobody cares that she answered a local congressman or local representative answered a question on Medicare for your grandmother. Stop destroying this nation. Tomorrow you're going to have to bury your grandmother, and guess what you're going to do? Sit in your car and leave the state and go to Indiana and other places. Why? Because you could not get your finger off of voting these people in. You couldn't move it from here to vote them out because somebody told you if you vote for the other party, the whole world's going to collapse. Look at Chicago. Your nation's falling apart. Your neighborhoods are falling apart because you keep on walking in and voting these people in. The onus is on you as a voter. That's it. And I'm sorry about the fact that the GOP here, the Republican Party in Illinois, is absolutely garbage. And I'm a Republican. I ran as a Republican. Garbage. You destroyed the city as bad as the Democrats did. You gave them no option to fight against them, and you allowed the Democrats to run Republicans in name only in your political party. And you did it for what? So you can get what? The crumbs off the table? Like a dog comes to the table? So you could be the dogs of Illinois and you could lick the crumbs off the ground? So what? So we lose these officers, they get killed because you have no intestinal fortitude to create an organization to counter what the other party is doing. So you're as much to blame as the other party is. So I hope the voters go out there and for the first time say in 2022, I don't care, I am first voting, so they don't steal my vote because they check to see if you voted or not. If you didn't vote, guess what they do? They take that vote and they steal it and slot somebody under your name. Secondly, vote that party out. Vote the parties that have been in charge of these districts, this Cook County, for more than 50 years, half a century. That's all you got to do. If not, the nation is lost. You got to win in Cook County. You win here, You'll fix the issues in New York and other places. But that's my rant. And I don't know if you agree with any of that, Al. If you think there's anything I said that is wrong, let me know.
Oh, very, very powerful words. You can definitely tell that you're invested in your community, and that's what everybody should be, is invested in their community and realize that your vote isn't just for national. That your community votes have consequences, and who you vote for in your communities can lead to situations that are very dangerous for everybody involved. And so I think you're absolutely right in that point. And you also brought up a good point in that. The party seems to be manufacturing dissent. It manufactures tension within the community in order to maintain its power base. And as you know, my other kind of hat is a historical historian that kind of researches how we find parallels. And just like we find parallels in the violence, if we go back further, we actually see in the South, the Democrats had a very similar mechanism, but what they used was the Klan and other groups to foment racial hatred in order to create a fear of the other, right? So the fear was technically at that time Black Republicans after the Civil War, and they created a fear that if you don't vote for me, something bad will happen to your community and they're going to take over and it's going to be terrible. And so they created this fear, but the fear, their political power base was based on division, not unity, not on coalitions, not on bringing people together as Americans, but of dividing Americans into adversarial groups. And unfortunately, human nature repeats itself, and therefore history repeats itself. And we see the very same mechanisms, and ironically from the very same party that did this in the 1860s, later on in the early 20th century when they revised the Klan, when Woodrow Wilson began that segregation within the federal government. And now we're seeing it again today. And the same party has a formula for their power, and they don't care about who it hurts. They just want to maintain power. And that's a human nature, that once they gain power, sometimes people want to hold it. And unfortunately, there is always Brutuses in every culture. You're going to have someone that will see their own power over their own nation, family, party, what have you. And so we have those opportunists, the uniparty, as we called them earlier, within the Republicans, that create this uniparty for their own advantages, whatever they may be. So you're absolutely right. And I agree 100% with that. I did want to say one more thing before we transition off. In the leadership that you vote for, to give you an example, go back and look at Chicago. Look at Lori Lightfoot's programs. Look at what she did, what she advocated, what she emphasized for. Look at everything she said since she's been in office and where she put the money and what she actually did with it, and say, has that created a more secure society or not? Right. So here's her record. She has definitely a record there that you can look at. And to give you an idea, what was her first message out? Her first message wasn't, we're very, very sorry for, Officer French. We're praying for a partner to be able to recover. None of that. As you said, they created this narrative, and it was all the way at the mayor's office. She blamed guns, but forgot to leave out, and it hasn't been amended since then, that the two perpetrators, or the two suspects now in this case, or actually two brothers, they were ineligible because they were a felon and not allowed to buy the weapons himself. So a third individual has been alleged or has been charged with providing a weapon to them, Jamal Danzi. So, you have gun control, you have all this stuff, but this is the mayor blaming something that's not actually a part of the formula for what happened here. And it's going to have to take a combined approach. Like you said, it's got to be the vote. It's got to get good leaders in there. And then you've also got to change the messaging, because right now every so-called news station, the corporate disinformation outlets, are invested in creating this narrative of us versus them and putting fuel on the fire rather than trying to calm these flames. So you're absolutely right.
Well, no, look, the only people right now immediately that can resolve this issue until we get to an election and vote these people out is the judges. Unfortunately, a lot of these judges got their appointment because of these individuals that are already in charge. So literally, you created a class of slaves to slaves. Your judges are slaves to a slave who's a slave to a machine that put them in their position. This is what you're going to run into. Hopefully, there's going to be at least judges out there who are going to say, you know what? I don't care how much money they donated to my campaign. I don't care how much they helped me to get into my position. I don't care the fact that they're the reason I am in my position. If this is what the law is, I'm going to hold to convictions of at least using the law to convict these individuals. And unfortunately, if you're going to have judges who are not going to be able to follow the law and use it to go after these individuals, hopefully, if they do come up for trial, but it takes political pressure again to get Kim Foxx here to put anybody on trial. Maybe finally we'll be able to get somewhere. And there's good people out there. I know that in the on the other side of the aisle, at the aldermanic levels, everywhere else, and they're doing their best. Alderman Lopez is one of them. But we have to start taking back our streets, our communities, and we cannot do it by just getting on social media and having these type of discussions. I know we're talking about it here on social media, or this program will be podcast, but at least I'm doing something on the ground. And I hope that our fellow Americans out there do something on the ground. It is not just protecting your family, folks. If you're going to have to be able to protect, reach out and start touching others in order to be able to protect us all overall, because you're not going to be able to do it on your own. And we cannot continue this way with these individuals sticking into their power positions. Straight ticket. You get a vote straight ticket 2022. Get rid of these people. Period. I don't care if you've never ever voted for the other party. I don't care who they run in the other party. Vote these people out. Otherwise, it's never going to work. And if you walk in and you're going to be selective and you're going to continue to vote for your party, then you know what? You're voting against your country. Period. Because your party is more important than your country, then you're useless to America anyway. Nobody cares. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, go pound sand. With that said, Al, I do want us to kind of take a look at what we had discussed almost a year ago. And again, I'm glad that there was a report recently passed on the possible leaks of the Wuhan virus from the Wuhan Lab. Tell us a bit about what we found out when we started looking at what the congressional officers are looking at right now.
No, absolutely. And what a difference a year makes. So, this time last year, it was getting pretty much banned. I mean, if you made the mention of Wuhan, the Institute of Virology being the source of the leak, you're basically banned. I mean, either shadow banned or literally that tweet would go off of Twitter. And so it was quite interesting to see this change, this volte-face that happens. And you kind of have to wonder why suddenly the information now is coming out when, the intelligence services have had this for quite some time, where the evidence was clear for anyone to basically be able to see and put the pieces together, and then, see where the pattern leads you. But for whatever reason, there was a huge corporate disinformation outlet push to suppress this information. But good on you for saying, you know what, I don't care. And I believe you got rejected a couple places before you were able to finally you had to go offshore to publish it. I mean, think about that for a second. In the land of the free, right? The First Amendment place with the supposedly free press, you had to go offshore to actually get this thing published. So, hats off to you for your persistence.
No, much appreciated. I think it was after the 12th iteration of trying to rewrite the article where I was like, man, I must be one of the worst writers in the world. But I realized that it had more to do with politics than anything else. And actually, it was about to go live. It was going to be in one of our Chicago newspapers. But I ended up one time, I got to take blame on this too. I ended up one time putting kibosh on it and said, hold on, let me just make sure. Because when I went to DC, after I had submitted the article here, I realized there are tones that are coming out from DC. And I realized, you know what, I can't put that newspaper under that type of a pressure. So at least I was honest with him. I told him, hey, look, here's the infight in DC. And I did another rewrite, but after that, it was too late. There was so much political pressure on our media in the West that we couldn't get anywhere. But, give them credit that the news outlet here in Chicago said, you know what, maybe it's better for you to take it somewhere else. And at least we did. And this was because we were trying to help on our allies. At that time, Japan was just going under a lockdown itself. And then, the article was written in January of 2020. Can you believe that? People don't understand. This article was written in January of 2020. I was in Korea in December of 2019. Department of State hadn't even pulled, their mission folks out of mission China until late January. So the article was written before even the State Department had moved their people out. We tried to publish it first week of February, and then it was just we went from there until 3rd of April when it was finally put into print. And even the second article we were looking at, even Japan at that time, Japan Forward started taking some flack, and we ended up not doing a 1-year anniversary article on it. But at least now we can say, hey, look, we had this call prior to the congressional report coming out.
Yep, absolutely. And we'll advance in the congressional report. And I will have to say that, it's interesting now, something that we didn't quite foresee at the time was that where these sources of pushback would come from. We kind of assume, it's an us versus them, it's the CCP versus the U.S. But since that time, there have been a number of congressional hearings that called Dr. Fauci up before Congress to look at, most famously against, Dr. Rand Paul and those sorts of folks. And it turns out that in a FOIA request that they've got emails from Fauci, that he, with the National Institute of Health, he signed checks that would go into Wuhan Lab to look at gain of function experiments. So, the U.S., as you pointed out, the French had been responsible for building much of the actual physical structure, but the U.S. was responsible for information transfers and for some funding and finances, for it, and some exchanges. So this was I think they didn't want to get their hand, caught in the cookie jar, so to speak, that they were getting benefits, because this procedure, this gain of function, is so dangerous if it jumps from the lab. It's so unpredictable that they banned it in the U.S. So the U.S. could not do these kind of Frankenstein experiments. So what do? Well, they offshore it. So they send it to China because, hey, maybe they can buffer it. And they're still doing unethical experiments according to the laws of America. So they kind of outsourced their unethical experiments, and we see the result from that. And so part of this pushback was, yes, from China, that they wanted to cover up, that they have this huge bioweapons program in China, the largest ever. I mean, it dwarfs the old Soviet biopreparat by, a couple of magnitudes, and even more because the international community is supporting it. At least with Russia, we couldn't really overtly help them. But here we have a bioweapons facility being given checks by the U.S. National Institute of Health, signed by Fauci, to go there to help them facilitate in this project. And that's, you could never imagine in the Cold War that actually occurring. So I think some of that pushback, it's been a good year to be able to see where the people were in our side that had been co-opted by the CCP or found that they had alliances with the CCP in doing these kind of, these Frankenstein experiments. And the more as time goes on, I think more information will come out. And it's very interesting to link those back to, okay, which papers and which news outlets were working really hard to cover it up, because maybe their board of directors actually kind of profited by some of this, or they're friends with those folks that were investing in this lab or the system of labs that China has. Because it's not just Wuhan. There are a number of labs in their biological warfare program. And that's something that I think we can look at. And you mentioned that in the article with Sverdlovsk, because you drew a parallel to Sverdlovsk in Russia, where in April of 1979 was, up until this point, was the largest biological weapons leak accident in history. And then they covered it up the same way. They said, oh, it's tainted meat and illegal black market meat that these people were eating, and that's why they all got sick. And the cover up, this was 1979 it leaked. And even as late as 1986, there were actively people that were in the U.S. that were trying to also cover it up to say, oh no, this is natural anthrax, when the evidence was clear that this was actually a manufactured anthrax. It was a new agent called anthrax 836 that they had made. It wasn't a naturally occurring anthrax. And so I think we'll see the same thing that'll happen with China, that it will reveal finally that they have a very large biological weapons program that's still very dangerous. It's still extremely viable. The difference in ours and say the Sverdlovsk or the biopreparat program in Russia back in the Cold War is that the Chinese one, now we're finding out, has a lot of fingers from America and some of our allies that are actually helping them along. And that's something that needs to get exposed and examined, and hopefully some prosecutions come from it, because we're talking a crime against humanity at this point. How many people have passed away? How many people have lost everything because of this virus that was leaked from a lab? So that's something we need to keep in mind. And you were ahead of the curve on this one. So hats off to you for doing the due diligence and keep going at it. So very, very good.
Well, look, we're hoping that it actually help anybody. Even people think that when we do these things, we get a lot of money paid off of it. I remember Japan Forward came to me and said, "Hey, we would like to pay you for your article." I'm like, I can't get paid for the article. They didn't understand why would you not want to be paid for the article you wrote. Most people who read our article get paid, because at that time I told them I was running for office, and if I had gotten paid from them, it's possible if I had won my election, I wouldn't be able to maybe take some key positions and the U.S. government and specific possible committees that might be able to address these issues. So, we do what we can. We do it by the law. But I got to tell you, Al, I know that just in June, I had provided some documents for Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, and just a couple of days ago, he was on One American News, again, being interviewed, and he said, look, the gain of function is taking place. And at least the COVID-19 virus, in this case, is a little bit less deadly, or maybe at 1%, but the gain of function might be even being used now in North Carolina labs. And they're looking at SARS, which is a much more deadlier virus that they're playing around with. I don't understand why we do play with these type of viruses. Nobody's ever asked for my opinion. If they had told me, I would have said no. But when you get back years ago, when we go back to World War II duration, scientists were sitting around the table and we're debating about trying to explode a nuclear bomb in the atmosphere at a more deadlier one than was used in Hiroshima. When they were asked, is it possible that it could burn the atmosphere? They're like, yeah, but we won't know until we try it. And thank God there was at least a officer who had enough brains to say, yeah, I don't think you want to try to burn the atmosphere. We might not want to do this one as long as I'm in charge. Really, it takes leadership to say, what are you doing? And stop doing it. And frankly, you can point a finger at China and the Chinese Communist Party, but they could easily turn around and say, well, you're the ones paying for it. It's U.S. taxpayer money, and you guys are the ones who funded the gain of function. We just, improved upon it based on the dollars that you were giving us.
Absolutely.
Can you explain to our viewers gain of function? Because if they don't understand what that is, and then if that's the case, why are we even doing it here in the U.S.?
It was a good question, and it goes back a little bit to biomedical ethics. And what we're facing right now. So as you mentioned, the ethics that we have, we've kind of gone away from it, right? So, I mean, we hung people in World War II, Dr. Mengele, his staff, and all that sort of thing for experimentation, for doing unethical medical experiments.
Now we make them multimillionaires. We give them.
Now we make them millionaires. Exactly. We give them immunity from prosecution, and we make them multi-billionaires. Exactly. So the issue here is deeper. And before I get into the gain of function, the deeper issue is the ethics, right? In other words, what are we as a society going to say? And we can't, and again, going back to my historical background, is you look at, okay, we hung people for doing this, and we make big things, Discovery Channel, we teach it in school and all this sort of thing. Hey, this is unethical, this is wrong. And yet, we'll turn around, and as you said, we'll make them on our side millionaires. It's like, we can't do that. What is the moral line, and hold the moral line? The Nuremberg laws were there. After that, there was a Helsinki Accord, which came from Nuremberg, and the Helsinki Accord specifically was designed around biomedical testing of humans, right? In other words, how do you do this, and do you introduce pathogens in the humans that may be detrimental? And these were the ethics that the scientists and doctors should have adhered to, just as strong as their Hippocratic Oath. And it was the Helsinki Accords. I think it was finalized in 72, 73, and the U.S. is signatory to it. So we violated that. In fact, right now with the military, it's a side issue, and I'll get right back on it. We're now mandating that, okay, here's an experimental biological agent, which is a vaccine, right? Especially the Moderna mRNA, which is a very, very new system.
Let's give it to everybody in the military.
Right. But that violates the Helsinki Accords. In other words, the Nuremberg laws, the Helsinki Accords, if you don't, and there's not enough data on it yet to give it reliably, or to force people to take it, right? That's forced experimentation, because they're collecting the data from people that they're giving it to. They don't have enough data to successfully give it. So even that process, forget all the little smoke and bells and whistles and nuances and things like that. Just that fundamental process, when you nullify the Nuremberg laws, or the Nuremberg Code, which was medically done in the Helsinki Code, evolved into it. When you nullify that as a society, what's next? What else was in the Nuremberg laws? You don't have to follow an illegal order, right? So now what happens? How can you technically prosecute for war crimes? Morally, you've lost your compass point, your azimuth, as you were saying earlier. And when you lose your moral azimuth, the results can be catastrophic. And we saw that in Germany when they lost their moral azimuth in the 30s. What happened when Russia lost its moral azimuth in the 10s and the 20s and up to the 50s? China lost its azimuth, and we see the results of this. Again, history it technically not true that history repeats itself. It is true to say human nature repeats itself. And we, as Americans, have the same human nature as everybody else in the world. We need to make sure, as our forefathers did, the founding fathers of this nation, they understood human nature and they created structures and political structures that inhibited and restricted human nature so we wouldn't abuse others. And we've gone against that, as you said in your voting thing. So I apologize for the sidebar, but it all kind of brought into your discussion there earlier and why it's important to get the political structure correct, because it puts human nature in check, which prevents things like this, like experimentation and unethical medical experiments in mass to huge population groups. So going back to gain of function. Now, a gain of function was banned in the United States it was started in the 1990s. It was banned about late 90s, early 2000s. And the reason being is because it presented a non-natural evolution. So, for example, the tomato, if you leave the tomato in the field, it's going to evolve in its own way based on nature. But if I take the tomato into my greenhouse and I cross-pollinate it with something else, and I cross-pollinate with something else, and I genetically splice into it with something else, I create kind of a Frankenstein. I've forced that evolution, right? Like I think your mention was the Chihuahua, right? If you leave dogs alone, they're like wolves, and they can kind of get to little breeds of wolves and coyotes and that sort of thing. Well, a Chihuahua is kind of like the gain of function. What's happened when human nature gets involved and we say, I want to create a dog to do what I want it to do. And so the Chihuahua is the result. I'm not quite sure if it's still a dog. Maybe it's a rat. I don't know if it's crossed over the whole genus there, but the jury's still out. It's a dog. So let's call it Chihuahua dog. I've seen my mother's Chihuahua. It's more of a rat, but we'll leave it at that. So the gain of function is where you artificially introduce characteristics into a virus in this evolutionary process that it doesn't normally do. You can force a characteristic into it, right? So in other words, I purposely, like, these two wouldn't actually breed, like two species of flower would normally not cross-pollinate, but I can make a manipulation to one flower. I can cross-pollinate it from another. So now it has to accept it. And they've created kind of a Frankenstein. And that's what gain of function is. It forces this evolutionary process in a way that wouldn't happen in nature, and it may go against the natural defense mechanisms of a virus or another organism, right? So in other words, we're playing around with fire, essentially. And it was, again, the U.S. looked at it and said, this is a bit too dangerous. We're going to ban it. And so what that does, though, is it looks like it's a normal evolution. You look at a Chihuahua, you think, oh, this happened in nature. No, it didn't. Human hand was involved in this. Modern tomatoes didn't occur in the wild. They were evolved into the fruit that we have today. So humans definitely, even a gain of function is a way that you can take an existing virus in nature, but you can add to it and you can manipulate it and you can force changes into it. And you can force characteristics into it that would not have gotten in nature, and it may overcome some safety mechanisms that are in that evolution. And that's what gain of function is. And that's why it's so dangerous, is because sometimes nature pushes back, and we can't model the weather tomorrow with 100% accuracy. And so we take something as like a virus that evolves and mutates and we don't have a handle on it. We're playing with something very dangerous. Now we need to understand it to be able to protect against it. And so that's important. So in this case, offshoring it to China was the worst thing that could have ever happened. If we had to do it, do you put it in a military lab or in a government lab that is extremely well controlled, like a P4++, right? A huge level lab that has an amazing amount of control if it's that dangerous, kind of like the Manhattan Project, right? You really put a lot of controls on it to ensure that human nature and human fallacies don't create, the Pandora out of the box. But instead, what they did was they banned it here completely, and then they offshored it into China with terrible standards, no transparency, no safety. I mean, China has an excess human population, so the value of human life in China is nothing. It's like sand, to an Arab, right? In Saudi Arabia, how valuable is sand? They got a lot of it, right? But you go in the middle of a city and the kid's sandbox is everything, right? So in China, the excess population, they have no problem losing, millions of their own people because they have an excess. It actually balances the books. So giving it something to that government, which has no value of human life, which has already multiple times said that their stated goal is domination of the world, and they have done nothing to dissuade us of that intent. Every step that they do, and I'll give you one more that the news barely talked about 6-7 years ago, but this I think is very important and should be frightening to all of us. Both the North Koreans and the Chinese share information, and so some of their university teams, both in the nuclear weapons and in biological weapons, as you know, they cross-level information. They were in Scandinavia, so they were up in Scandinavia in the islands doing ice core drilling. And they were actually working with a Scandinavian university to get ice core drilling because they wanted to get as close to the pristine European DNA as they could. Now, why in the world would you want
Yeah.
that? Why would it be in secrecy? Why would you not share that information with everybody else? So the DNA is kind of the next step. If you can custom make a bullet, if you can custom make a biological weapon, a bullet specific for your target, you've reached the goal line, because biological weapons, they blow back, right? They kill your guys and their guys. But if you can tailor it so it's only a certain group.
You know how you do it? It's very simple. Do it like the Christmas present that I was given. Here's something from History Channel. They want to see what your DNA looks like so they could track it back to your ancestors. You spit in a cup, send it back, and then you realize that after you've done that, fast forward 6-7 years later, that information is actually shared with China, because it actually goes into China and for them to be able to take that data and calculate it out to what possibly your linkage is. So if tomorrow I create a bioweapon, in this case, a Chihuahua, we created them for whatever reason, in this case, to give maybe happiness to your mom. But this is a deadly virus that you're playing with, and you're doing game function on the deadly virus that could kill as many people as the Spanish flu did. So this particular virus, if you're playing with it, it's only because you're trying to bypass the natural mechanisms that Mother Nature has put on it to make sure it's not as contagious. When you're playing to make it more contagious, it's a bioweapon. So you're creating that bioweapon. Now, if I have, in this case, Colonel Sangari's DNA, and I have a number of other Americans who have provided their DNA for free to me, and all that information has been sent to China to calculate, why would I not, as a Chinese military leadership, when it comes to the fact that one day I might be in a war with the United States, I would like to have as perfect of a bioweapon capability to fight against them. Why not be able to create this type of a bioweapon to be able to target it specifically to that particular genome? And if I could do that, then I could kill as many people as I can on the other side, where it may not even affect my people. And this is what this whole process is unfortunately, we got universities right now that actually allow Chinese students to come here that pay in full cash, most of them, for those universities. And those universities are now opening up branches in China, fully knowing that whatever information they give to those students may be stolen and taken back and used by those students, not to just make themselves multimillionaires, but also give back to the Chinese Communist Party, in order to be able to use it for their wants and desires on global control. And this is an issue we deal with everything, whether it be, cloaking technology that is out there that was stolen in 2018, to everything else that we're dealing with today.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And you mentioned a good point with those kits, those little, genealogy kits that you get with your DNA. Some of them went directly back to China. Some of them, their databases were shared with China. So you have this problem that they've mapped our DNA, and in China, there is no private company. People fail to realize that you're not a private citizen. There's no private company. Everything belongs to the state. It is literally the definition of fascism. Nothing outside the state, everything within the state, right? So everything is part of China. So these private industries, these universities of China, they are Chinese government functions, right? And they all work within, technically, the CCP army, right? So the Red Army it literally staffs half of these industries and half of the universities. And it's interchangeable. They put a suit and tie on, they go to a university to become a professor, and then they come right back, and they can put the uniform on right at any moment. So American companies, believing this, they don't understand the nature of what we're dealing with the CCP. They facilitate this. Like you said, they bring over students that are technically, they can spy, they can do agents of influence. Confucius Institutes were just one obvious element of this. But the second is just on the individual level. You put a student in there, and unless we've done a good CI on them, unless we, have screened them, unless we're like monitoring them all the time, they can be stealing anything. They can literally take any technology. And so we put these big barriers for technology transfers. We look at Boeing, we look at Raytheon, we look at Lockheed Martin. We have all of these big controls, but we're forgetting everything is just being moved out these little mouse holes, one bit at a time, but it definitely adds up. And so we've protected ourselves from the elephant, but it's going to be the mouse that steals all the grain out of our storehouses. And that's vital. And it'll come around to hurt us. And we need to understand this is a whole of nation, a whole of society approach that the Chinese have taken. And unless we counter that and understand the threat, we're in trouble.
Well, speaking of the elephant in the room, It's always a pleasure talking to you, Al, but I realize we definitely went over time. And we'll have more opportunities to talk about these issues. Well, year in review is always a good thing to do. But I do want to give you a last word on everything we talked about, Al, and then kind of close it out for us. And then I do have an announcement I want to make sure I put out for our folks that are living in the at least the 9th Congressional District here.
Well, I think you hit everything right now. What a difference a year makes. A year ago, we were being silenced about, what the truth was. This year, the information comes out. But what are we still dealing with? And that's, how to make our communities more safe. And the same forces that tried to silence, the Wuhan Lab leak are the same groups and organizations that are trying to silence how best to make our communities safer. And we need to be aware of it and understand and come together and organize to be able to counter this misinformation that's coming out from the other side and attempt to silence us. And good on you, Colonel Sangari, for keeping up the fight no matter what. And we definitely appreciate it. And thank you very much for allowing me to be on.
Look, I got good advisors, as we would say in the military, I'm the monkey in the suit, as the advisors that really keep us moving forward. Al, you're
at least not the chihuahua in the suit, and that's good.
Yes. Well, that's all they are. You give them a banana, they go in and they go to party lines. That's why we call them monkeys in the suit, on both sides of the aisle. They're useless, absolutely useless. That's why I was trying to join the useless team in 2020. You figure we make a change, but I hope more people get out there and run, put pressure, and get these people out of the way. I do want to let our audience know that there's, unfortunately, again, keep the current officer who's fighting for his life in your prayers. He is going to suffer major, significant problems in his life. I do know how extensive those injuries are. However, there's going to be a police rally August 10th, tomorrow at 5 p.m. in Mark Prospect Police Department, so to support them. So please do me a favor, go out there and support your police officers. And tomorrow, hopefully, we can see you guys out in the Mark Prospects Police Department. And these people, these guys do need to hear it from you. Trust me, the police officers want to hear it from you. Our prayers for Ella French. God bless her. She's not the first officer to die this year. Unfortunately, she won't be the last. And it's because we have allowed our the future of a department to be killed so that one garbage politician can continue to get reelected and do a lousy job representing the people of the United States. Shame on you. Shame on all those politicians. But, I don't think they even have shame. So the words probably bounce off of them because as long as they get the machine, they could care less. Al, with that said, we'll have you back on again, buddy. It's great to have you on the team. And God bless. This is New Paradigms.